This weekend, as any Marvel fan will tell you, is all about the Endgame. Avengers Endgame will wrap up the massive cliffhanger from last year's Infinity War. And a warning, we won't be spoiling Endgame, but we will be discussing a number of Marvel's movies up to this point. Now, this isn't just about whether Cap, Iron Man, and the rest of the team will be able to bring back their fallen comrades. Because over 21 movies, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has actually raised a number of thorny questions, teaching us about ethics, leadership, and even moral philosophy.
Even if there's a small chance that we can undo this, I mean, we owe it to everyone who's not in this room to try.
And that's where Chris Robichaud comes in.
I'm a senior lecturer in ethics and public policy here at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I'm also a lifelong fan of superheroes and comic books and comic book stories.
So let's get right to it then, with the Avengers. What makes them interesting?
One of the things I really love about the Avengers that we've seen now over multiple movies is, believe it or not, their dysfunction. And by this I mean, individually here are these amazing superheroes, and we've seen their stories, their individual stories. And then Nick Fury early on says, hey, I've got this idea of, bringing together an ensemble of extraordinary people to do, extraordinary things.
The idea was to see if they could become something more. See if they could work together when we needed them to fight the battles that we never could.
They don't often succeed at what they do. And I think that's important. I think it's important for us to see that just because you've got a lot of power doesn't mean that it's automatically going to succeed in staving off the bad. By the time we get to Infinity War, they're all over the place. They're not communicating with each other. They're literally not talking to each other. They're going offline, where this huge threat is coming, and not just a threat to the Earth, but to the universe.
So what's at the root of this dysfunction? Is this difference in leadership, or is this something more fundamental? Is this a different moral outlook?
Part of it is who actually is leading the Avengers, right? So they're sort of vying for the leadership.
This doesn't have to end in a fight, Tony. You just started a war.
We've seen over the course of these movies, they're really starting to approach their mission in fundamentally different ways.
I was wrong about you. The whole world was wrong about you.
There's this amazing scene in Captain America: Civil War where they're considering, the idea of being watched by the UN, and we see them torn apart in part for philosophical reasons. So Tony Stark, Iron Man, who's almost always full of himself and his ego and convinced that he's got the righteous path, he's the one that's like, maybe we ought to have some oversight. We have no decision-making procedure in this team.
We need to be put in check. Whatever form that takes, I'm game. If we can't accept limitations, we're boundaryless, we're no better than the bad guys.
Similarly, Captain America, it's the guy who's supposed to stand for democracy who's like, I don't know if we should hand our authority over to a deliberative body.
If we sign this, we surrender our right to choose. What if this panel sends us somewhere we don't think we should go? What if there's somewhere we need to go and they don't let us? We may not be perfect, but the safest hands are still our own.
If we don't do this now, it's going to be done to us later.
That to me makes them a very interesting team to watch. They have not yet assembled.
It feels like that has such ready comparison to so many real-world conversations in that vein. What do you find the easiest parallels with?
It's not that Steve and Tony are disagreeing and one of them is a lunatic and the other one is the voice of reason, right? Both of them have reasonable positions on things. That's something that I see show up a lot in the American context and elsewhere. Our disagreements at times, we're terrible at treating our opponents we disagree with respectfully.
Stay down. Final warning. I could do this all day.
But often the disagreement is a reasonable one. People just prioritize different things. They emphasize liberty more. They emphasize equality more. The entire Marvel Cinematic Universe is very much a post-9/11 universe. And one of its central questions is, to what extent should safety and security trump individual privacy? And part of that conversation is, to what extent should democratic institutions make these decisions versus behind closed doors, government agents, or private organizations?
I'm not looking for forgiveness, and I'm way past asking permission. Earth just lost your best defender, so we're here to fight. And if you want to stand in our way, we'll fight you too.
So let's jump from what are usually our Earthbound heroes, the Avengers, out into space to another team, to the Guardians.
Guardians.
What's the difference here? They seem to run very, very differently.
The Avengers are a team, and they're struggling to become a functional team. The Guardians of the Galaxy are a family. It's a chosen family, right? They've chosen each other, but we can see the idea of them being a family, sort of putting up with each other's, flaws and insecurities. Groot is the baby turned teenager by the time we have Infinity War.
Groot.
And Groot.
Whoa!
Hey!
They work together, I think, because they have a kind of family relationship.
This is a man. A handsome, muscular man. I'm muscular.
But who are you kidding, Quill? You're one sandwich away from fat.
Yeah, right.
It's true, Quill. You have put on weight.
What?
I just love in Infinity War, they're responding to this, crisis signal. In the midst of trying to figure out what the heck's going on, there's all this back and forth. There's the jealousy of Star-Lord. There's Drax saying, you put on some weight. It's like what would happen in a family. You're in the presence of a god, and meanwhile they're talking about whether there's been weight gain or not.
I'm going to commit. I'm going to get some dumbbells.
With Infinity War, we're talking about a threat on an entirely different scale. And Thanos wants to eradicate half the universe. But he's also rationalized this to himself as a good thing.
Too many mouths, not enough to go around. And when we faced extinction, I offered a solution.
Genocide.
But random, dispassionate, fair to rich and poor alike.
So what makes this different than just straight up genocide?
So if I could frame this, in philosophical terms, Thanos is sort of a pure consequentialist. He will sacrifice any individual, including his beloved daughter, for the sake of pursuing the greatest good.
I ignored my destiny once. I cannot do that again. Even for you.
I think that there's something deep here because Thanos sees himself as being quite rational. Many people think that consequentialism taken to its logical conclusion can be quite horrific because it fails to take into account the individual. A lot of our heroes are, fancy term coming, deontologists. They believe that, the greatest good is not always the thing that we should keep in mind. We should cherish relationships and individuals. The heroes regularly do not put the greatest good above any individual. Captain America has that great line.
Thanos threatens half the universe. One life cannot stand in the way of defeating him.
But it should. We don't trade lives, Vision.
So let me ask you, what happened to the nihilist villain? What happened to the bad guy that just wanted to watch the world burn? Everyone has to have these grand aspirations and these reasons for doing these horrific things. Why?
Nihilism, I think, is a hard thing for us to wrap our heads around at times because we always think that there's got to be reasons other than to watch the world burn. But it is more helpful, I think, for us to sort of sympathize with characters if we can get our heads around an agenda that they have that at least seems reasonable. It's just more interesting to engage a villain who isn't just a cardboard cutout. I view this all as a warning to us. Thanos, in a sense, says, look, here's my reasoning. His reasoning is seductive.
Your planet was on the brink of collapse. I'm the one who stopped that. Do you know what's happened since then? The children born have known nothing but full bellies and clear skies. It's a paradise.
Because you murdered half the planet.
A small price to pay for salvation.
You're insane.
And it's an invitation for us to say, look, there's something in what Thanos says, but we don't want to end up like Thanos. So where do we stop ourselves? So it makes for great personal reflection too, I think.
And as you said, that insistence that this is all for a greater good tends to blur the lines between good and evil in characters that we have previously placed on one side of that divide. And you named Loki and Nebula. Those are two great examples. What does that tell us and the fan reaction to characters like this about the way we prize that moral ambiguity, that finding good in the bad or finding bad in the good?
Yeah, I think that, Marvel superhero stories on cinema have given us an opportunity to recognize that heroism does not come in the sense of you're always righteous and perfect and making the right choice. It's an invitation for us to look inward and realize, look, a lot of this is gray. People that we care about who are aiming at the good sometimes fail. I feel like this is empowering in its own way, because it's telling us you don't have to have it all figured out. A lot of the world doesn't come in black and white, but that doesn't mean you should stop aiming at doing good things. And even our heroes are not perfect and do fail and have disagreements, and they're still trying to bring about good in the world. And even our villains, there's something to what they're saying, even though they've clearly gone around the bend.
Let's go to Captain Marvel for a second, the movie, not the character, because that was kind of a different sort of conflict at its heart. This is a generational struggle between two alien races.
Prove you're not a Skrull.
What does the Kree-Skrull War tell us about power?
One thing it invites us to do is to not assume that we have figured out who the good people are and the bad people are based on the initial framing of things. Early on in Captain Marvel, the Kree are good, the Skrull are bad. And, you know, the Skrull perfectly fit the bad paradigm because they're shifty, literally, they're shapeshifters, you know. But I think the movie in part is saying to us, you know, not everything is what it seems. Indeed, so much of Captain Marvel is about not everything is what it seems. And maybe you should get to know the supposed enemy a little bit more before passing judgments about them. I don't hear Captain Marvel as giving us some lame story where everyone's really good at the end. That's not the case. It's just, it's more complicated. And I think that's an important lesson.
And Captain Marvel herself, the character, not the movie, is immensely powerful, perhaps more powerful than any hero we've seen so far. She and Thanos wield their power so differently. And what does having that much power mean?
One of the things I love about superhero stories is their stories of empowerment. And the Captain Marvel story that we got in this movie is a classic example about this. You know, for a good chunk of the movie, she doesn't remember exactly who she is.
I don't remember my past.
And she's got all these people telling her who she is, and she's like, all right. And it's only towards the end when she literally takes off, you know, the thing that's been binding her and constraining her, and she embraces her power, that we see Carol Danvers becoming, you know, Captain Marvel. And then she creates she becomes an unbelievable weapon, creating a whole bunch of havoc for the Kree. We know that power corrupts. And so we hope that Captain Marvel can not become corrupted. The thing that's interesting is we don't know. Hers is going to be a path of wrestling with tremendous, tremendous power. An ongoing lesson for us that power can corrupt.
And we really haven't seen that yet in the MCU, which is focusing on a hero who is grappling with the effect of their enormous power on their personal, not just philosophy, but their morality. And it would seem that that's a fascinating place to go in the future.
I think it has to go there in the future. You know, I mean, in many ways, we've seen these characters dealing with their power and dealing with the perhaps accidental misuse of it. But we really haven't seen too much, I think, in the cinematic universe, as you said, with the corrupting influence of power. I guess the MCU can't do everything in a mere 10 years with a mere 20-some movies. I'm glad there's stories still to be told. Yeah.
What's up, guys?
Now, obviously, there's the old chestnut from Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. What other responsibilities do the powerful have?
Yeah. I think that one of the most recent movies that has explored this in quite an interesting way is Black Panther. So, you know, Black Panther has this amazing exchange halfway, 2/3 through it, as Killmonger comes to Wakanda, and he sort of throws down.
It's about 2 billion people all over the world that looks like us, but their lives are a lot harder. Wakanda has the tools to liberate them all.
And what tools are those?
Vibranium. Your weapons.
Our weapons will not be used to wage war on the world. It is not our way.
And what the movie challenges us to consider, and again, this is a great idea of the villain, is, you know, there's something to that. Killmonger isn't entirely off. Is this a responsible use of power? Is fighting injustice in this way a good use of the power that you have? that's an interesting philosophical disagreement. And so I give to the credit of the Black Panther and to the Marvel Universe at least asking those questions. What does responsible use of power look like? There's never one answer to that.
A lot of people find distinction between the MCU and DC universe, the cinematic universe, even though they don't call it that, through visual means and like what the directorial sensibility is. But it seems like there's something much more fundamental at play as well. How would you mark that distinction between the ethos of the two universes?
I think Marvel sort of takes it for granted that there are these existential threats to humanity, and is looking more at how individuals who have the capacity to do something should conduct themselves in sort of, attending to this. So there's some overlap there. But I don't see there to be tremendous tension in the Marvel universe with what DC's looking at as, their relationship with the people. But we don't get that. We get a Superman and Man of Steel who's like, I don't know if I should reveal my powers, or if I should. I mean, his dad in that movie, quite remarkably to many people, has this conversation with his son when his son saves the bus of kids, being like, yeah, I don't know if, that was the right time to do it. And, young Clark Kent's like, but I can save them. I said, I don't know if you should save them or not.
What was I supposed to do? Just let them die?
Maybe.
Wonder Woman, which I adore this movie, right? Wonder Woman at some point realizes, it's not Ares that's causing humanity to fight each other. It's humanity causing humanity to fight each other.
Ares is dead. They can stop fighting now. Why are they still fighting?
That's because maybe it's them. Maybe people aren't always good.
And she asks out loud, are you people worth saving? Is there anything here worth doing? And so there's this really complicated relationship I see in the DC universe, at least in those examples I've given, between the heroes and the people that they're trying to be heroic for. I don't see nearly as much as that in Marvel. And so I think that there's a richness there in the DC movies, despite the fact that often they do sometimes fail on their own terms, and they're darker than what a lot of people want.
And in Marvel, not necessarily grappling with those individual questions, is much more concerned with what?
I think that one of the things that Marvel does a great job of exploring is broken people can have power, flawed people can have power. Let's look at them wrestle with how to do good given their power, but also their flawed natures.
We're not a team. We're a time bomb.
Superhero stories in general, this is a theme that I've often talked about, have a good side and a bad side. The good side is they often give us stories about individuals being empowered and trying to do good, and they sort of inspire us to do that. The bad side is that they sometimes create the impression that if you're just a good person, you will do good things. And we know that that's not true. And so I see that in a lot of the movies that we're looking at, this theme of, well, what happens if someone with power who's not good gets in control, comes again and again. T'Challa sits on the throne of Wakanda, great. What do people do when it's Killmonger who sits on the throne?
Nah, I'm your king.
Would we trust Captain America with the Infinity Gauntlet? I bet you a lot of people would be like, yes. Should you? I don't know. It can ruin people. I think that theme resonates very much with our political moment, is that we see that just because you have power doesn't mean, one, that you're good. And even if you are good, having a lot of power means that you might use it in untoward ways. And so I see us trying to work this out in our superhero stories.
Excellent. Well, have a great day. Thanks so much.